It was supposed to be a normal patrol, just a routine shift on a quiet summer night in 1977, when the wind whispered through the cliffs like a warning and the moon hung low over Devil's Hollow. But what happened to rookie officer Mark Whitaker that night would vanish into darkness, swallowed by silence and the weight of secrets that no one in Crescent Bay dared to face until 13 years later, when a brutal storm cracked the coastline and unearthed a horror no one was prepared to confront. So, before we dive deep into the mystery of Mark's disappearance and the chilling discovery that shattered a community's trust, make sure you hit subscribe and watch until the end, because what you're about to hear is not just a case, it's a reckoning. A real-life nightmare where the past claws its way into the present and forces the truth into the light. No matter how deeply it was buried, the storm hit Crescent Bay like an ancient curse awakened, tearing through the jagged cliffs and lashing the coast with wind strong enough to rip shingles from rooftops. It had been raining for days, but this night was different. The sea churned with a fury that seemed personal, almost intentional, and when lightning struck the northern ridge, it sent a cascade of rocks tumbling down into a ravine long forgotten by time, and among the twisted roots and wet earth something white gleamed in the stormlight. Something not made of stone or driftwood or sand but of bone, long and narrow, a human forearm with fingers stretched in a final grasp for freedom. The body was discovered the next morning by a local named Dennis, who had been checking on his fishing gear after the storm calmed. He saw the remains sticking out from the cliffside like a terrible secret begging to be seen. Investigators arrived with caution, pushing through the mud and tangled brush, and what they uncovered made even the most hardened crime scene veterans pause in silence. A partially decomposed skeleton in what appeared to be the remains of an old police uniform, its metal badge corroded by years of salt and soil, but still bearing a name familiar to every officer in Crescent Bay. Whitaker forensic tests confirmed the truth. It was Mark Whitaker, the rookie who vanished on July 18, 1977, during his third solo patrol, the man no one had seen since that warm summer night, the man some believed had simply walked away from the job, while others whispered darker rumors that no one dared to say aloud because speaking his name was like inviting trouble. Mark had been the department's rising star, fresh-faced, eager, and idealistic in a department that had grown cynical and hardened by small-town politics and invisible lines of loyalty that meant more than law. He was partnered with Thomas "Tommy" Granger, a seasoned cop with a reputation for toughness and a talent for getting results, even if it meant cutting corners. Granger was the kind of man you didn't question, not if you wanted to last in Crescent Bay. Mark was last heard from when he radioed dispatch about an abandoned vehicle near Devil's Hollow, a winding stretch of coastal road lined with cliffs and sharp turns. After that, nothing, no call-ins, no backup requests, no final words, just silence. The search that followed was massive. Helicopters scanned the coast, dive teams searched the water, volunteers hiked the cliffs and scoured the woods, but nothing was found, not a footprint, not a scrap of fabric, not a clue. It was as if the ocean had swallowed him whole. The town mourned, the department moved on, and Granger? He gave a heartfelt statement, said he was devastated, claimed Mark must have slipped and fallen into the sea. It happens, he said, even to the best of us, but not everyone believed that story. And over the years, quiet suspicions grew into private theories, especially among the younger officers who didn't yet owe allegiance to the old guard. They talked in hushed tones about Mark's last few days, about how he'd been asking questions, poking into evidence reports, suspicious of missing items from the department's property room, and how he'd confided in a dispatcher named Alice, saying he thought something big was going on behind closed doors, and he didn't know who to trust. Fast forward to 1990. The body's discovered, the uniform is examined, and what they find shakes everyone to the core. Broken ribs, a shattered hyoid bone, signs of ligature marks around the wrists, and most importantly, the badge pinned to the uniform? It wasn't Mark's, it belonged to an officer named Vincent Morelli, who had died in a car crash in 1976, and was buried with full honors. But his badge had supposedly been retired. How did it end up on Mark's body? Someone had gone to great lengths to obscure the truth. This wasn't an accident. It was murder and a sloppy cover-up at best. The district attorney ordered a full-scale reopening of the case, and what followed was a descent into a nest of corruption that had infested the Crescent Bay Police Department for over a decade. The files from 1977 were incomplete, statements were missing, and key logs had been tampered with. Someone had erased Mark's last location report and the evidence log from the week prior to his disappearance. When investigators dug deeper, they found records of internal affairs complaints that had been quietly buried, including one from Mark himself filed just a day before he disappeared. The name at the center of all these vanishing records? Tommy Granger. Interviews began anew, this time with pressure and subpoenas, and one by one, the old officers started to crack. A retired cop named Eddie Flenner finally broke after 2 hours of questioning and revealed that Mark had caught Granger and 2 other officers, Crawford and Ibbotson, moving unregistered firearms from the evidence locker to a private storage unit downtown. When Mark confronted them, they threatened him, told him to back off or face consequences. But Mark didn't back down. He told Eddie he was going to report it. That night he disappeared. Granger was arrested on charges of obstruction and conspiracy while the investigation continued. But before trial could begin, a second storm hit the town. Not weather, but testimony. A man named Samuel Mendez came forward with a letter, written by his late brother, who had worked as a janitor at the department in the 70s. In the letter, the brother confessed to seeing Mark tied up in the basement of the old precinct the night he vanished, beaten and pleading with Granger to let him go. He claimed Mark was taken out in the middle of the night in an unmarked cruiser, and that he heard Granger say, "The cliffs'll shut him up for good." Confronted with the mounting evidence and the recovered remains, Granger's defense fell apart. He was convicted in 1992 of second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. He died in prison 5 years later, never admitting what he did. But the town never healed. The truth had come out, but the damage was deep. Families of other officers who had left quietly began asking questions. More cases were reopened, and in the span of 2 years, the entire department was restructured. Crescent Bay had to start over, rebuilding trust from the ground up. And yet, there was something even deeper beneath this story, something still unresolved. In 1995, a construction crew working near the old Ranger Trail unearthed a rusted lockbox filled with documents, Polaroids, ledgers, names and dates, evidence of an off-the-books operation that had stretched beyond Crescent Bay, possibly into state law enforcement circles. Mark had found a thread, and Granger had killed him to keep the whole web from unraveling. Today, the cliffs where Mark's body was found are marked by a small plaque, weathered and barely legible, but locals leave flowers there, and every July 18th, the new police force stands in silence to remember the rookie who didn't bend, who paid the price for his integrity, and who, thanks to a storm, finally saw justice. Don't forget to subscribe to Crime Watch World for more gripping real-life stories that uncover the darkest corners of human behavior. Stories like this one that remind us that sometimes it takes nature's fury to reveal man's deepest crimes. Stay tuned, stay curious, and most importantly, stay vigilant, because the past has a way of coming back when you least expect it.